Aloha and welcome. My name is Jasmine Winnie, and I have the honor of being your Master of Ceremonies for today's Journey of Peace Seminar number 6, War's Climactic End in 1945. We'd like to thank our incredible partners who continue to make this series possible: the East-West Center, Miss International Hawaii Melody Higa, Pearl Harbor Rotary Club, West Point Society of Hawaii, and our host, the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. And today's moderators, Karen Knudsen and Lila Berg. Karen Knudsen is the chair of the board of directors of the Japan American Society of Hawaii and an adjutant senior fellow at the East-West Center. Lila has served 15 years in the Hawaii's Department of Education and 3 terms in the state legislature as vice chair of the Education Committee. She's been a leader in civic engagement, a founder of Kids Voting Hawaii, and is now the founder of Spirit Ed. Please give them a warm aloha and round of applause. For those who have attended our previous seminars, welcome back. For our new guests, we thank you for joining us on this powerful educational journey. Our first session recounted the campaign of the Mariana Islands in the Pacific in June, July 1944. Our second session focused on the air, land, and sea battles in and around Leyte, Philippines, beginning in October 1944. The third seminar explored the liberation of Luzon and Manila and its several military and civilian prisoner camps for the horrors to humanity that they were. And in the following month, in Seminar 4, we remembered the manifestation of a deliberate and wanton escalation of violence that emerged early in 1945, resulting from the dehumanizing of desired strategic outcomes. Lastly, in Seminar 5, we recounted the continued escalation of brutality on Okinawa, a total war campaign, and the bloodiest battle of the war. Today, our focus shifts to the final and most consequential decision of World War II, the use of atomic bombs, and Japan's eventual surrender. Our panel will explore the realities, rationale, and aftermath of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, an ending that would change the world forever. Please welcome our moderator for the evening, or for the afternoon, Ms. Karen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jasmine, for that. And thank you to our supporting organizations and to all of the folks who contributed to make this event possible. There's a very strong group of committed people who really have worked hard on this. And a special thank you to all of you for showing up today. We know there are multiple activities taking place on Oahu today, including the Blue Angels, but they'll be performing tomorrow as well. So thank you for joining us here today. As co-moderators, Lila and I will serve as the bookends to this rowdy group of content experts. So we're going to try to keep us on focus, or focused and on task with this. But we're all very fortunate to have these folks here with us. Before we begin, Lila, would you like to read the disclaimer?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for being here. This is such an important, not just day, but such an important conversation that we're going to have. And the disclaimer is that Journeys to Peace is an unincorporated group of individuals. Today's session will contain factual information, and personal views that are expressed are those of the individuals and not of the organization. So please have your questions in mind as you're hearing the content, but also as you're listening to our distinguished panel.
Thank you, Lila. Now, in alphabetical order, I'll be introducing the speakers. Today are panelists, SMEs, subject matter experts, and these very abbreviated bios that I'm going to be reading. Just know that they have a very, very deep expertise in what we're talking about today. And I would encourage all of you to look them up individually, because we won't be able to get to all of their experiences in this short bio. So first of all, to my left, John Hansen is a retired Army colonel with 25 years of service in combat arms aviation. He served as Director of Army Air Force Development in Afghanistan, where he trained and flew with the Afghan National Army Air Crews during Operation Enduring Freedom. And if you've seen pictures of Afghanistan, you can imagine what it was like to be training with the Afghan Air Force. Pretty intense. He's a principal analyst supporting Indo-PACOM and adjunct professor of political science at HPU, Hawaii Pacific University, and president of the West Point Society of Hawaii. He's also a coordinating member of the Journey to Peace initiative. Dan Leaf is a retired Dan Leaf is a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General. General Leaf is widely known by his fighter moniker, Fig, and so I might be referring to him as Fig, because that's how we mostly, you prefer that, General?
That's fine.
Thank you. General Leaf, or Fig, is a decorated combat fighter pilot and leader. He's a former director of the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies and served in that capacity for 5 years. With broad expertise in the Indo-Pacific, Fig is also the managing director of Phase-1 LLC. It's a company that provides consulting services focused on peace on the Korean Peninsula, conflict resolution, and strategic leadership. Fig is also the honorary consul for Vietnam in Hawaii. He has broad expertise, as I mentioned, all over, and he'll go into a little bit more of his experience as we progress. Finally, Jim Moriarty is a retired U.S. Foreign Service officer, having served as U.S. Ambassador to Nepal and Bangladesh. He also served as Senior Director for the Indo-Pacific at the National Security Council and Special Advisor to the President. Jim also headed the political sections at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing and at the American Institute in Taiwan. In total, he spent 5 years in both Beijing and Taipei. Jim is the former chairman of the American Institute in Taiwan, a position that required him to accompany the president of Taiwan on the occasion of their visit or transit through the United States. For those of you who might not know what the American Institute in Taiwan is, we don't have an embassy there. So as chairman, you're either an ambassador or it's a different kind of relationship in Taiwan, but it holds the same kind of way. Jim is currently a senior advisor to the Pacific Forum. I have to put in a personal plug for Jim. About Jim, Jim and his wife, retired Ambassador Lauren Moriarty, were the East-West Center's first and only tandem diplomats in residence. I think it was in the 1990s. Yeah, I'd love to brag about that. So now first we're just going to talk a little bit about, to set the stage for what we're talking about today. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to visit Hiroshima or Nagasaki. May I see anybody who's been? Okay, quite a few. The impact that it has on you, it brings it home, always. So that was something that we're all hearing about now because it's the 80th anniversary of what happened. So today we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive, and you'll be hearing from them about some of the lead up and then the aftermath and what we're doing. But I think as we sit here and just to absorb all of this, it's been a journey. And to imagine that our countries could now be of the closest allies after what had occurred. So do we have the slide to put up there on Hiroshima? I think we'll look, and Nagasaki. The war had stopped in Europe. The Germans had surrendered and the Japanese didn't. So we're going to talk about why. There'll be some rationale why we dropped this bomb and then what that did in the future for us. Do we have the slide up?
Should be number 6, Jasmine.
Okay. Because there have been a lot of studies, we know the impact going forward, and so we just to think about that, and for those of you who haven't visited either, it is pretty memorable and impactful. So with that, I think we're going to go on and say, what were these? What was the bomb? What is the atom bomb? What happened? John, I'm going to turn it over to you, and please
And
Ed.
before we do, Karen, you know, you're talking about the facts and the drama of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We sometimes don't think about the people who have been affected. And so I'd like to ask one of the members of JPI, Steve Dyer, to just share with us a little bit about his experience in talking with some of the survivors.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. So I saw that many of you here have been to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so this might be OBE, overcome by events, but we thought we had a duty in putting on this program today to at least give an idea of the personal experiences of the hibakusha. How many here know what a hibakusha is? Okay, so for those of you who don't, hibakusha is Japanese for someone who has survived an atomic bomb. So he means exposure, baku means explosion, and sha is a person. So in putting this together, the committee asked me, I think I'm the only one here who's lived in Japan, and I speak Japanese, so I know several hibakusha. And they said, you know, Dyer, why don't you bring them here so we can hear their stories? So I talked to the hibakusha I know. One's in Hiroshima, he couldn't come. Two of them are here, and I talked to both of them, and they respect what we're doing here today, and they want their story told, but they couldn't come. It would just be way too difficult for them. It's PTSD to the max, frankly. So they asked me to read their stories. So I'm going to read them to you. So please indulge me. Gotta get some light. So the first one is actually a former client, and I've changed her name here to protect her privacy. Thank you. So Keiko Yamamoto. Keiko was 11 years old on August 6, 1945, and went to school that morning not far from the detonation site. By the time she got there, she did not feel well. She told her teacher, who told her to go see her doctor. Her doctor was about 5 miles away, and she knew the way. So she got on a crowded rush hour train, standing in the aisle surrounded by commuters. After a few miles, there was a tremendous bright flash, followed by a boom and a rush of pressurized heat. The train stopped. All the windows were blown out, knocking everyone over. Keiko was buried under a tangle of bodies, but was able to get up. She looked around. Many of the people were not moving. Some of the people, she saw their faces melted. She somehow got up, got out of the train, and tried to walk back to her school. And it started raining black drops. She saw corpses, burned people, and fires everywhere. She found her school, and no one was alive. She walked home, and her family and home were gone. She was taken to a police station, and her relatives from the countryside were summoned. They came and got her, and then raised her. From there on, she faced much prejudice. No kids wanted to be her friend, fearing she would convey a disease to them. As a young woman, no one would go out with her or be her boyfriend. Her relatives could find no omiai. Who here knows what an omiai is? So an omiai is an arranged marriage. And so your parents ask, you know, a matchmaker or other families who you want to be, you know, joined with. Nobody would send a man to be a candidate for her husband. So she left. She moved to Honolulu. She finished college, got married, learned English, had normal children, and she lives here now as a 91-year-old. But she still has nightmares. She could not come today because of fear of triggering nightmares and breaking down. About a month or two ago, Chris Moylan, where are you? Chris and I were invited to lunch with Lawrence Miwa's son, Stephen. And Stephen told us this story. So his dad, Lawrence Miwa, was born in Honolulu, 4th generation Yonsei, but was sent back to Hiroshima, where the family was from, at age 2, while his father remained in Honolulu to run the family business. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Lawrence's father was incarcerated and sent to an internment camp in New Mexico. His business holdings and bank deposits were confiscated by the U.S. government. The Miwa family lost everything. Lawrence's father was sent back to Japan in 1943 as part of a prisoner exchange, only to be persecuted by the Japanese authorities for his pro-U.S. beliefs. On August 6, 1945, at the age of 14, Lawrence was with his class on a field trip outside of Hiroshima, while his parents and siblings lived in a concrete house in Hiroshima. Lawrence saw the B-29 plane flying over. Then he saw a bright flash. He survived. Immediately he took a train into Hiroshima Station, which after a while was working, to look for his family. He was shocked at what he saw. From the station, everything was completely burned and in ruins. He could even see the ocean, which previously you couldn't see from the station. He finally reached his home. 2 concrete walls were all that remained. On the side of the water tank, he found a note from his family. Father, mother, and older sister safely evacuated. If you are alive, walk to this address. So he was relieved they survived. On his way to find them, he passed hundreds of corpses. Many were infested with maggots. As he could not do anything, he just prayed that they would have a peaceful rest. Lawrence's experience in Hiroshima is documented in his childhood diary, which he discovered later in life. And then he published the diary as Gambare Hiroshima, Don't Give Up, with his son Stephen Miwa. He also co-authored a book about his family story in Hawaii and Japan with his son and author Tom Kaufman called Tadaima, I'm Home. Lawrence passed away in 2023. We have books from Lawrence, if you're interested afterwards. Seiki Hirotani. Seiki Hirotani was a young cavalry officer during the war, and they were still using horses. He was stationed just outside of Hiroshima, and he was from Hiroshima. He saw and heard the blast, but was too distant to suffer any injury. He immediately ordered his unit to mount up and ride into Hiroshima to inspect and help. He saw people staggering away from Hiroshima. There were massive fires and great clouds of smoke. The closer he got, the greater the damage and the worse the injuries. He saw people with burns and holding their hands out with skin literally dripping off them. Closer, he saw corpses scattered all over, especially bunched and bobbing in the river. Even closer, there was very little left standing, and but for burned out concrete structures, nothing else. Strangely, he thought, there were no corpses. He got to his family home and it was gone, with only some foundation and plumbing fixtures left. He knew his mom and grandmother would be in the kitchen fixing breakfast, so he went to the kitchen sink and found 2 piles of ashes with partially melted wedding bands in the pile. He then went to the living room where he knew his dad would be seated at the kotatsu and found another pile of ashes with a wedding band in the pile. After the war, Hirotani married, had a family, and became a successful businessman. He joined the Hiroshima Tonan Southeast Rotary Club, the closest Hiroshima Rotary Club to the Hypo Center, and was set to be president in 1990-91. The Tonan board and most of the club members wanted to become sister clubs with the Pearl Harbor Rotary Club. Beginning that year, seeing the significance of grassroots peacemaking between the Rotarians from the locations marking the beginning and the end of the Pacific War. But Hirotani was too bitter. He refused. Over my dead body, he said. He prayed for many months and finally forgave. He then led the first friendship visit from Hiroshima Tonan to the Pearl Harbor Rotary Club. Many Pearl Harbor Rotarians were against the relationship too, but after hearing Hirotani's story, they forgave. Tonan and Pearl Harbor have become fast friends and visit each other yearly. Akio Nishikiori. Akio Nishikiori is currently 88 years old. He's a retired architect, living with his wife in his hometown of Hiroshima, where they both have heart conditions, which prevents them from leaving their home. He is a past president of the Hiroshima Tonan Rotary Club. On August 6, 1945, he was 8 years old and a second grader. He went to school that morning, but fortunately his school was shielded by a hill, and he and his classmates survived the blast. He ran home immediately to check on his family, and his little sister, who was playing in the yard outside, was lying dead in the yard. His parents were knocked out, but they survived. He saw the fires and how devastated his hometown was, and all the buildings gone. At that moment, he vowed to become an architect and rebuild Hiroshima. That is exactly what he did with his life. He became an architect and rebuilt wide thoroughfares lined with trees, the Peace Park, and was the Hiroshima city architect for 35 years. So those are some stories. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Steve, for sharing those stories. I think in listening, Steve, to what you shared, I think every day we're confronted by similar, not the same, but scenes of violence and war around the world. What makes this a little bit different? How different? And I think that's what we're going to kind of talk about. Jasmine did the lead up in some of the past programs that we've done, so we've heard about the horrors of war, horrors of war. This was the one that ended it in the Pacific, these bombs. So let's go, I think, John, tell us why this was important to have this decision, and we'll go through and listen to the others.
Well, thank you, Karen, and again, I express my thanks to these two spectacular moderators. If you don't get to know these great ladies, please take some time to. They do actually bookend a gathering of crusty old dudes, and add a quality to this whole discussion. 80 years ago this week, 6 airplanes dropped 2 weapons and ended a war that had begun, frankly, in 1933, officially. Not for us, but for the world. Previous bombing missions over Japan were in the hundreds of airplanes, hundreds, B-17 airplanes. This was 6 airplanes. We're going to talk more about that here today, and certainly General Leaf has a lot more to offer in that regard from an airman standpoint. So I thought it would be interesting to describe this weapon, which has never ever been used again, this atomic bomb. It's never been used again. And so before I go there, though, I would like to add that although this was the final shot, perhaps, of the war, the journey to peace continued, and honestly, it continues to this very moment. And for you guys, particularly in the front row, to continue the journey, because the effects of the war, as we've talked about in these past several sessions, are still playing out. This is a classic. So I thought it would be interesting, and I take a little risk here because I'm not a physicist. I don't know anything about nuclear chemistry, but I do want to take a moment to describe, if we can, this strange confluence in the end of the 19th century where humanity had spent a lot of time trying to probe into 2 different kind of camps. One is, how do I change dirt into gold? You might know that as alchemy. Spent centuries trying to figure that one out. It was a dead end, of course. The other one is this incessant desire for this particular individual to try to understand gravity, one of the fundamental forces of nature, gravity. Why does something with mass, why does the Earth have gravity? And so, and just to pulse the audience here, do any of you folks, particularly in the front row, know who this is? Yeah, go ahead, shout it out. Albert Einstein, very good. What rank are you? Oh, you're just an hour of light guy. Excellent. Well, welcome to the troop. It's a whole different level, as these guys will tell you. Albert Einstein, he frets over this for the better part of his younger life. And in 1905, he comes up with this relationship between mass and energy. And not to bore you with the details, but he concludes that things of mass have energy. And if you change the mass even a little bit, it emits a tremendous amount of energy to unbelievable numbers. So this energy equals mass times the C2, or C squared. The C squared is the speed of light squared. And that's 186,000 miles per second squared. It's near somewhere around 314 trillion units of any change in mass. So he comes with this theory. It's very much a theory, but he comes to grips with the fact that things with mass, if you change the mass even a little bit, it emits tremendous energy. Even if it's a movement of mass. I'll give you earthquakes. Earthquake in northern Russia that we all kind of panicked a little bit about here, a tsunami, was a movement of mass that generated an energy wave that moved across, propagated across the ocean at 500 miles an hour. Not the water, the energy. So 1905, that happens. A few years before, the discovery of this heavy metal called uranium that is fairly unstable and emits things. It emits radiation. This is the birth of X-rays. This is how we get X-rays. So this very dense material has this instability. And so those two things are happening. Chemists are looking at this uranium. Einstein's looking at this relationship between mass and energy. Well, they come together in the next slide, if we could, with an interesting crowd of people. So a Frenchman discovers uranium. Einstein theorizes this relationship with mass and energy. And then these four German scientists, and oh, by the way, most of these folks are Germans, we'll get to that in a second, come up with, really, they discover inadvertently that if you shoot something into a uranium atom, it splits. What they were trying to do is add more mass to the atom and create something else. They ended up discovering that it actually splits, and it gave off, an unbelievable amount of energy confined in a small space. 1938, that happens. Einstein's watching all this, and in 1942, he sees how this could be weaponized. In defense of the Germans, these four Germans, they were looking at converting it into an energy source, heat water to create energy. And so only the one that's got the red highlighting actually was part of, stayed within Nazi Germany and kind of dabbled a little bit in maybe this could be weaponized. And the program did get some traction in Nazi Germany. The rest of them, all Jews, were driven out of the country. Sweden, some came to the Americas, some elsewhere. And so in 42, Einstein connects the dots here and says, this can be weaponized. It's theoretical, but highly possible. And by 45, the Manhattan Project delivers the actual weapon that does it. Now, we're ahead of the game in the arms race for developing the atomic weapon. I'd say by the grace of God that Hitler drove out most of his smart physicists. Some of them came here, thankfully, and the weapon was provided in Trinity test site in 1945, July 1945. At the same time, Okinawa is petering out, but the death casualties are still rolling into a shocked country. Philippines is still being contested, and the horrors there we talked about. Then we have this weapon that's now validated and produced. So that's where we are when the decision's made in August of 1945 to use it. And we'll talk more about the logic and the rationale there. But let me just stop there and thank you for your patience, and there will not be a physics quiz at the end.
Thank you for the setup to that. Next, I'd like to just ask Fig, if you could, from a personal perspective, describe the challenges and risks of the delivery of this weapon.
Well, the challenges and risks for the airmen, for the crews of the B-29s, were the same as they were for other airmen on other conventional missions. And I don't think it is well known that as many U.S. Army Air Force officers were killed as all Marines, officer and enlisted, in World War II. So they were used to loss rates, and for them, I suspect it was just another mission in terms of strapping in and going out and doing the job, as some of us have, Dick. That wasn't special, but the weapon was. And we knew that it was special, and the risk there was, would it work, or would it work too well? And I'll come back to this later, but they knew it was a special weapon, and that word special has more significance than usual. They knew it had the potential to be war-changing and perhaps even war-ending, but they really didn't know exactly which genie would come out of either the little boy, fat boy, or whatever, the two big bomb, the bigger bomb and the littler bomb. And so there's additional risk. It's not just Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire, it's what happens. And they did it. They executed it not perfectly, because no combat mission I ever flew went perfectly, and yet they achieved the desired effect and brought the desired outcome, the Japanese surrender.
Thank you, Vic. And when you mentioned the different flights you've been on, 3,600 hours in F-16s and F-18s, is that correct?
F-15, F-16, F-4,
Wow.
a bunch of different.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Do you want to compare the military advantages with the stunning effects, or do you think you...
Well, you know, we had set about bombing Japan into submission, which is a bit of a fool's errand, we've learned over time. You know, it's very difficult to subdue an enemy by bombing alone. There has to be all other aspects of national power. But the demonstration had to be made to the Japanese government and military that there was no hope for victory. And often we talk about the will to fight and destroying an enemy's will to fight. And I think we have that backwards. The will to fight, the emotional component of going to war, is more important at conflict initiation. The United States did not have a will to fight until Pearl Harbor was attacked. We were supporting the Allies, but we did not want to be in it. So making that decision as a nation or whatever entity is going to war is important at the end, or at the beginning. At the end, it is pretty pragmatic and realistic. We can't win. Germany could not win, so they surrendered. The Japanese definition of victory was far different, at all costs to all people in Japan. They were willing to sacrifice everything and still consider it a victory. The United States had to demonstrate that that wasn't a viable path. And so the hope was that these weapons would do that more quickly, right? We would have continued with conventional bombing and perhaps with an invasion of the Japanese main islands, but this was to accelerate the process of convincing the Japanese government and the emperor that there was no hope.
And so if we look at the rationale for the use, actually, Ambassador Moriarty, can you weigh in on this, because from your perspective?
I love telling personal stories. All you kids probably talk to your parents and hear personal stories about what they did, what happened. Well, I kind of look back and say in 1945, when the decision to drop a bomb was being made, my father, who had spent 5 months in a Nazi prisoner of war camp, had just been liberated. His two brothers were in the Pacific theater of the war. So I got to imagine what Grandma Moriarty was thinking back then. because in Okinawa and Iwo Jima, the Japanese were showing they would fight to the last man, and to some degree in Saipan, to the last civilian. And indeed, the record shows that they had plans to totally mobilize their society, ketsugo, in other words, fight to the very last man or woman. Doesn't make sense in retrospect, and I'm sure there were lots of Japanese who did not support it, but that's what the United States, which had been surprised, hurt, and badly damaged by the attack just a couple miles from here on Pearl Harbor in 1941, that was the context in which the decision was made. President Truman said, that wasn't a difficult decision. We had the ability to end the war, and we were going to do that as quickly as possible. In contrast, people trying to estimate what it would take to subdue such a determined enemy willing to fight to the last person, the casualties on the American side would be high, and frankly, the casualties on the Japanese side would be absolutely enormous. So that was the rationale. Get this, as people have been saying, how do we end this war as quickly as possible?
Thank you for that. And maybe between John and Fig, following up the state of the progress of the war in 1945, and then also the projected casualties of a home island invasion. So, Mr.
Well, in the millions on both sides. But a point that, as I prepared for this seminar, really came to mind, I thought about the rest of the war, the broader World War II, and please take this as a thoughtful, serious comment. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not big deals in terms of numbers of death. If you look at the bombing in Europe and the loss of civilian life in Poland, the rape of Nanjing, the bombing of Chongqing, the death was rampant. In a numerical sense, it wasn't that big a deal. It wasn't a numerical choice. The big choice was that these are, in fact, special weapons that do it instantaneously. I appreciate Steve sharing the stories, but there are stories from the Warsaw Ghetto and from Dresden and from Manila that are just as tragic. It was the instantaneous nature, not the numerical matter, that mattered.
John?
Yeah, I agree with absolutely all of that. I would just also offer a perspective from maybe John Q. Public in Peoria, Illinois, now looking at the entry into a fourth year of U.S. involvement in the war, where Jasmine, I don't know if you could pull up, I think it's slide 11, it's a graphic on how, as each year went by, the casualties, both military and civilian, particularly civilian or military, just escalated exponentially. 1945 was a disastrous year for humanity. And now we're looking at another going into 1946 with a plan that's on the books right now. As we talked about, with the estimates based on the Ketsugo defense that the enemy or the Japanese would put up, would be upwards around 400,000 killed, U.S. allied, and then upwards around 1 million wounded and 5 to 10 million Japanese. But I think from a perspective of the American citizen, there was an exhaustion. Some of the casualties that were coming out of the war in 45 had been high schoolers when it started. Some of them, pretty large number actually, that lied about their ages to get into the war. These are young Americans, the country was at a point, the new president was at a point where there's exhaustion. Germany was over, but now we're looking at this continued mindless fighting in Asia. That's, he's getting these figures. This is what it's going to be, 2 million casualties. And to not have to go to the American people with that, because this weapon might end it, because no one really knew, was, as Ambassador mentioned, that was an easy decision for Truman. And so, but, and the last thing I'd say is economically, it's a good thing we were kind of the last economy standing at the end of the war because we had buried ourselves in debt. But we came out of it because we were providing for the rest of the world as it rebuilt. But the debt compared to now, we fret a lot about our national debt now. This was a tremendous shock. Anyway, so yeah, all that kind of comes together.
And I think it's important to understand that this was not just mathematicians working their slide rules and making estimates. There was plenty of empirical evidence from the fighting in the Philippines and up the islands into Okinawa that this is how a land battle for the Japanese home islands would go. That there wasn't a gray area. It could be this very low number. It was going to be a very high, torturous, tragic number.
So next, I think, Fig, I'm going to start with you on this, and you can tell some of your personal professional experience. How has this weapon influenced and shaped all elements of national power since its one and only employment 80 years ago? And you have great expertise and experience, and then all of the panelists come.
Well, my Air Force career, while it was principally as a fighter pilot, had nuclear threads throughout it. Like Dick May there, I was a nuclear certified strike pilot in the F-4 as a first lieutenant. And that process was arduous. You spend a couple weeks studying your line. This was either January or February of 1977. I could find my target today. I could go to Europe and find that target. That's how ingrained it is. And you work to the moment where you swear an oath that if ordered, you will deliver a nuclear weapon in combat. We call that the holy moment in the nuclear world, because it is. Imagine, I'm a 24-year-old second lieutenant, and I'm saying I'll deliver a nuclear weapon that is in the shadow of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Later, I had the responsibility as a one-star wing commander for storing nuclear weapons and protecting them to exacting standards. And later, as the number 2 guy at Air Force Space Command, oversaw our intercontinental ballistic missile fleet. And later at Pacific Command as the deputy and for a brief glorious time the acting commander. They have unique responsibilities in strategic decision making. And so I've thought about the special nature of nuclear weapons throughout, and sort of an epiphany came to me getting ready for this, and this may be a bit out of sequence, but it's a point I really want to get to. We lament the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We should lament all war and all loss of life. But we should also give the United States credit for how we viewed nuclear weapons from the outset. We understood their special nature. The scientists who developed the capability were troubled by what they were delivering. Right? The decision to use the weapons was clear but not easy, and had been worked through very carefully. And then after the war, the United States, being a moral republic, established civilian control over nuclear weapons, which was not a given. They could have just been another tool in the military's arsenal. And they implemented extraordinary controls that still exist today for all things related to nuclear weapons. Personnel who have anything to do with nuclear weapons are specially screened. The equipment is treated differently, and to what detail? As when I had the storage mission in Europe as a wing commander, if you had an uncertified trailer hitch on a truck that towed nuclear weapons, you would flunk an inspection. Every detail was managed. We did not allow one person ever the authority to deliver or do anything with the weapons. It's called two-man control, right? We had special enabling equipment in our F-4s that required authorization from the National Command Authority to be entered into this PAL system, it's called, before you could deliver a nuclear weapon. So the United States built a construct to respect the special nature of nuclear weapons, that once the Soviet Union and China and others got their own nuclear weapons, carried over. And the moral concern and the care that was given to it built a paradigm in the Cold War that has prevented, I believe, any use of nuclear weapons in other conflicts. We, the United States, have a special understanding of this capability that has influenced the world and been very important to our continued existence.
And with that in mind, that we've taken the leadership, the constructs for weaponry and so many precautions, right? And thinking ahead also. What did we learn from all of this? You know, one of the things that this effort is about is a journey to peace. And looking at the conflicts in the world right now, there is a political scientist by the name of Joe Nye who suggests that a combination of power and interdependence is a way to peaceful international relations. Ambassador, could you start us in that? Is this a real idea?
Joe Nye is a great man, was a great man. On this, I've got to say that, 20 years ago, if I had told myself that 20 years from now, you're going to be longing for the days of the Cold War, now, I would have thought that you were absolutely crazy. You had these two superpowers bestriding the world with tons and tons of nuclear weapons that could destroy the world. And yet, the United States and the Soviet Union figured it out. This gets to your interdependence. There was an interdependence. It's called mutual assured destruction, in this case. Please don't get me wrong. You can have interdependence based on power, and that brought stability. Nowadays the world is very different. The near peer power, the only power in the world that's nearly as powerful economically and militarily as the United States, is China, and it's coming from a completely different perspective. It remembers what they call a century of humiliation. China's got a terrific culture, lots of brilliant people. For centuries it was the most advanced country in the world, and then it wasn't. The European colonialists took over. They were obviously more advanced. Now China is coming back, but it feels like it hasn't been respected in the past. It hasn't gone through the steps that the United States and the Soviet Union went through, where they came so close to the edge. There was something called the Cuban Missile Crisis. Again, my father, who survived World War II, was mobilized for that. And you had the Soviet Union and the United States, two nuclear powers, facing off to a degree that people feared there was going to be a war. What could happen in a war? It could go nuclear. And after that, Soviet Union and the US began to say, wait a sec, how do we limit ourselves? How do we begin to talk about limiting the number of weapons we have? How do we talk about de-escalating crises? And over the rest of the Cold War period, we did pretty well. We signed a treaty, for example, banning missile defenses that could be destabilizing. If one country thought that it could shoot down all of the other countries' missiles, then that other country would always be afraid that the first country would use nuclear missiles because it figured that that country could not react. We're not there with the Chinese right now, and we're not there with other nuclear powers that are coming up. General Vic Leave spends a lot of time thinking about the North Koreans. You saw that we just ended up bombing Iran because of their attempts to build a functioning nuclear weapon that could threaten us. So in some ways, the world feels much less stable. And I will get back to interdependence and power really are keys. And I put it in a slightly different way of interdependence, which is we have to know that our continued living relies on the other side's continued living.
And with that in mind, for the other gentleman also to weigh in at this point, especially with our younger audience here, who will be facing so many more decisions and so many more situations. The changing in climate now, as we've been brought in this conversation, can also be a catalyst for conflict. Rising temperatures, extreme weather, resource scarcity, water, food, the droughts in the Middle East, the Arctic Circle. When we talk about mass relocation because of the islands of Kiribati and Tuvalu that are sinking and because of the water, there's a lot of territoriality, resource disputes. Where do we go from here? How do we help this generation also? Because weapons are a reality. What can we do?
Well, good luck. I think, the different pressures, climate, food, water, economies, whatever, people have never had trouble finding something to fight about, right? So conflict, sadly, is inevitable. It's the deterring it effectively, finding ways to make it less likely, and then limiting it. Well, I share Jim's concern about the People's Republic of China because they have what I believe is a false notion that they can control events in a conflict that, from my experience, is just crazy. You simply don't, once you start down that path, very difficult to precisely steer the outcomes. So what can we do about it? Maintaining the standard of strict control on nuclear weapons is one way. There are others that I'll get to. But, there have been those who suggest that the United States just get used to North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons. Because they've got them, 50 to 100, right? And they've got the delivery systems, and importantly, they have they have an authoritarian government, but they've authorized the first use of nuclear weapons. So that matters even in a dictatorship, right? But we can't say that's okay, not just because of the risk, but because of the importance of treaties that control international behavior, at least to a certain level. So there's something called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, shorthand the NPT. And it's kind of arcane, you can look at it, but it was projected that 20 to 30 nations would have nuclear weapons if that treaty had not been implemented within 10 years. And instead, we have a very limited number of nuclear nations. Some of them did not sign the treaty, India, Pakistan, Israel. So they didn't break the treaty. North Korea did. They signed the treaty. So if we say, yeah, it's okay, you get your nukes, let's just not use them, and we render this treaty null and void, we're opening the doors to national behaviors that we can't stand. We have to think about the logic of the limitations on behavior, the norms. You know, I think that norms, standards, rules, and laws are what drive human behavior or bound human behavior. We can't let go of that treaty, that law. And what else does it apply to? There are a couple areas that have the potential to revolutionize combat in pretty devastating ways. Drones, that genie is kind of out of the bottle, and we've seen it in Ukraine and elsewhere. And the next one is artificial intelligence. I gave the United States credit for having a very thoughtful approach to nuclear weapons. Somebody in the US government, this administration, has said they'll lead thinking and capability in artificial intelligence. It may not be as kinetic, as violent as nuclear weapons are, but we need to lead that thinking too, not just the development, but how they're applied and not applied. What are the boundaries that become international norms? So, like I said, good luck, but we've done it before. This is a tough environment. It's not the toughest environment. I'm pretty sure World War II was. You know, I can't imagine any more difficult global environment. A key to me is U.S. national leadership on thinking and deterring and moderating human behavior.
Do we have time? Jasmine, can you put up, there's a slide that kind of lists the how things have proliferated and then how the world has tried to keep it in a box. I don't know if that made the slide deck. It was with the what I sent last night. I'm sorry? Nuclear, post-Cold War, or something like that. Anyway, so if you can find that, that would just kind of underscore what General Leaf has been talking about. Getting back to Joe and I, so Joe is bridging the gap between realists and liberalists, and so these are theories right in international relations that power rules, and realists would say the powerful get what they want. The liberals say no, the nations can agree to collaborate and cooperate at an advantage. And so events like World War II in history can be system-changing events. Clearly, before the war, realism was driving the train. Japanese wanted things, they wanted the China power, they had the power, they could do it. And even to this day, China is a bit of a realist. And if you look at what they're doing in the South China Sea, just doing a kind of an island creation grab, pushing around some of their neighbors. That's a very realist thing to do, very expected, from that particular theory. But after World War II, the world got together in a more liberal attitude to collaborate. I give you the United Nations. And most of the states that are members buy into these treaties that come out specifically to address these weapons. I don't know if, did we find it? Okay, no biggie. Non-proliferation, there's probably at least a dozen treaties. The Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties, a couple of those. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the Ambassador mentioned. So the collaborative, interdependent, from a security standpoint, world that has kind of emerged from this war has tried to keep in check the proliferation of these horrible weapons that everyone agrees to should never be used again. Oddly enough, it also is a source of power. And so you get countries like Iran and others that we've mentioned that want to join the nuclear club. Why? Because if they've got the weapons, now they have, from a very realist standpoint, the power to influence or maybe even get what they want. So that's kind of where we are right now in terms of what Joe is getting at. He was talking a lot about economics. Countries that trade with each other probably aren't going to nuke each other from that standpoint. And so that's also a hope maybe across the Taiwan Straits, that the economic linkage there stems the violence. The last thing I would say is that again, by the grace of God, it is very difficult to create nuclear weapons. There's a whole bunch going on there. Just ask any Iranian nuclear physicist if there's any still around. Uranium is not just shot with a neutron and all of a sudden we have a bomb. It is a tremendously difficult thing to do to get the reaction, the sustained reaction, which is what powers nuclear power plants. Which was what the original goal was, right? So that helps a little bit, but the fact that North Koreans have it is probably because there's a little bit of interdependence there with some nefarious folks that traded some of that info. I think Pakistan was involved somehow. But just wanted to add that. I know we're probably out of time.
Actually, we were right on time for questions from the audience. And so if we can have the house lights please come up, and if anyone has a question, please.
Not a question from my conference perspective, and our esteemed colleague, they talked about his experiences, thank you, his experiences actually carrying or preparing for potential nuclear sortie, and I had the same experiences. So just to offer a thought, the pilot in the cockpit who is tasked to deliver that weapon is very, very unlikely to have second thoughts about the impact of that weapon or what it will do. I had none. I worked hard enough to memorize every bush, tree, everything that I needed so that I would succeed, because I believed that that was, if we had to do it, was to prevent greater evil and to execute what our country decided. The possibility of somebody going rogue in the United States is zero. I just can't tell you how stringent our control measures are. And so that is relieving. I talked at dinner with Paul Tibbets some years ago, who was the commander of the Enola Gang, and asked him how he felt about it. And he said, it was a mission we needed to do, and I felt good that we executed it successfully. So you're not going to look at the pilot in the cockpit as being the stopgap here. What you need to look at, as several have alluded, is national behavior. You don't want a nation that decides that their back is against the wall and nuclear weapons are a source of power and must be used as a source of power. So I think that's amazing. And if you ask me, looking at the whole conflict of World War II and where we are with our friends, the Japanese, close friends and allies, and we tell the story here of Airman Nishikaichi, who attacked Oahu on December 7th, lost his life on Niihau. Years later, when we took his 91-year-old brother, his prayer flag and artifacts, there were no dry eyes in that room. So those who were once enemies can become fast friends. And so those are good people as well. Again, we did what we felt we needed to do at the time. But I think hopefully we have learned lessons and we are able, at least in our nation, to say we never want to use a nuclear weapon again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, please. And the microphone is coming around.
Two over there.
Along those lines, thanks, Dick. The friendship, Steve very poignantly at the beginning talked about these people who experienced the horrors somewhat on a random basis, because neither Hiroshima or Nagasaki were primary targets or secondary targets. They were military targets, but ironically in Nagasaki, the epicenter was the Catholic cathedral. Nagasaki was the center of Christianity in Japan, and we dropped an atomic bomb on the top. So, such is war. But now the peace, the hard part, the peace. In our Rotary Club that Steve described, it's been meeting for almost 50 years now, exchanging visits, person to person, creating peace. Fig Leaf, who works hard on his personal windmill, North Korea to create peace. Your generation has that challenge. Those of you here were fortunate enough to hear these people and their wisdom. I hope it has an impact. God forbid if it doesn't. Because that's the only way that we're going to make it, is people who believe in peace, retired Army, 40 years of government service. The most important thing is peace. I honestly believe that. And the only way that happens is through organizations like Rotary, presentations like this. So, not really a question, but thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Karen, can I respond to my close friend Bruce? Congratulations on your new hip. I have to bring that up. You guy's a hipster. Done war, done peace. Peace is harder. It's much harder. It's hard work. It can't just be the Rotary Club. So I applaud everything you've talked about here, but we've got to work at it and work at the reconciliation. And the United States poured billions and thoughtful occupation, if there is such a thing, into the reconciliation with Japan, and Japan reciprocated. The reason I'm the honorary consul for Vietnam is I was part of the difficult efforts between our two countries to reconcile post-war. North Korea, nuclear power, this is now where I get on my high horse and say we have not done that, and that's why we're at risk of nuclear conflict. So let me ask the audience, who is more likely to have been killed by conventional or by U.S. bombing, a Japanese civilian during World War II or a North Korean civilian during the Korean War? Who's more likely? Japanese or North Korean? North Korean is 5 times more likely. And we've never reconciled. We've never even ended the war. So if you're looking for things to do, find ways, the hard ways, to make peace, to engage, to do the distasteful discussion about why we bombed North Korea and why they did the things that North Korea did, like starting the war. Okay? You can't just wish it away, and Japan and the United States and Germany and the United States and Vietnam and the United States didn't wish it away. We should learn that lesson with North Korea. And by the way, both Koreas and Japan, China and Japan, should also learn that lesson.
There we go. First, thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the panel, for coming here, sharing your knowledge, and giving us young generation folk an opportunity to learn from the experiences of everybody and to, God willing, prevent another horrific attack. But my question, especially for the younger generation, as cyber and AI and holy cow, a bunch of computers are getting more advanced, and we are, I would say, from my opinion and experiences, we are starting to step away from traditional warfare and entering cyber warfare. So my question is, would you overall, generally, would you see cyber acting more of a tool or a threat to peace? Because, just a quick little background, I'm about to enter the service as a cyber warfare engineer. And, just like back then when officers had to drop bombs or deal with that, as a cyber warfare engineer, we have to make the decision whether we can just click one button and we can shut off entire infrastructure, grid, power grids, water grids, very crucial resources to not just military but also civilian stuff. So overall, how would you see a cyber affecting peace? Would it be a tool or a threat overall?
We need him on a panel, don't we?
Okay, folks.
Yeah.
Quick crack at that. Unfortunately, way too many people at this table probably remember well 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the computer takes over and gets out of control. How?
Yes.
We all know. So, how many other people in this audience know 2001: A Space Odyssey? Well, you remember, basically an out-of-control computer starts making all the decisions. That, I think, is the most important factor. And what I mean is agency of the human. That basically, agency means that the big decisions, the AI, the cyber can come up with suggestions, it can come up with data, but the big decisions, particularly ones that would affect human lives directly, and not just kinetically, but also just kind of destroying wealth, or in other ways, making life horrible for human beings. Those decisions we have to keep to ourselves. I think all of the countries inherently get it, but as they enter into the race to see who can be ahead in AI, artificial intelligence and cyber, there is a tendency to say, well, this is so neat, let's just let it go. So that's going to be the big thing for all of you folks to watch out for. Are we, the humans, still in charge? Or are the machines, Hal and his grandsons, in charge now?
And I think the big challenge with that, and I couldn't agree more, you know, philosophically, the big challenge with that is time. And how do you find time for the human in the loop, the moral authority for death dealing? And given the automated capabilities that our adversaries might have, do we retain a positive control, human in the loop, or do we have to build that into our own cyber and AI capabilities? And is that even possible? But it's a dilemma that we should address at every turn.
Yeah, I would just add to Obadiah's question, if you think about it, so many of these things are dual use. Nuclear energy is thumbs up. Okay, the airplane, pretty cool thing to have. Rockets seem great, but you have this other weaponization going on, and this particular domain, cyber, is now a bona fide Department of Defense domain. We've got a command now looking at how we defend within that domain, in addition to space, which are almost joined at the hip. Now, getting to the danger of the human out of the loop, or even just on the loop, that's some TBD. That's, guys like you, when you get back to school, put together your papers and publish them. You guys too. Even not the Scoutmaster. Anyway, so yes, it is an interesting conundrum.
General Wyszynski?
Hey, thanks.
Hey, Frank.
Ladies, gentlemen, great job. Laid it out very, very well. Again, the state actors, and you all laid it out extremely well. The control, the release authority, all of that rests with the President of the United States. I mean, nobody just walks up and presses a button. My concern, as with all of you, is the same. What about the non-state actors? Hamas, Hezbollah, those who do not have a moral, ethical code about, or a principal release authority for something like that, and if they were to get their hands on it, don't really have that same thought process or release capability. And the same goes for cyber. You're not going to press the button to stop anything.
Yeah.
Okay? The release authority for that is the President of the United States. And every country has that capability, because once you start that, it's almost the same thing as a nuclear weapon. You're shutting everybody down. I just would like your thoughts on non-state actors.
Very difficult problem, Frank. Thanks. Thanks for throwing that in our lap.
Yep, I'm on it. Thank you. Thank you.
But I think that differentiation between state and non-state mean that in both cases we have to have intelligence awareness. Our intelligence community needs to do their jobs very well. And I guess my differentiation, if I were in a position to decide, would be the preemption of a non-state actor comes far more readily than preemption of a state actor. You know, you don't necessarily assume the worst with a national actor like China or Russia, but you may have to with a non-state actor who it doesn't have the same control mechanisms.
And I've got to raise the one question on that, because I love looking at deterrence. How do we stop the other side from doing something that we don't want it to do? With the nation states, we have lots of tools in our quiver. You know, you look at what the military describes as DIME, diplomacy, information, military, economic. You can make an adversary realize that doing something against the U.S. interest is not in that adversary's interest. Non-state actors become really tricky because, you know, they don't have territory by definition. They don't control an economy by definition. You know, they might be smuggling drugs or whatever, and that by definition is illegal everywhere. And so they are finding ways to get around that already. Information, non-state actors, they're living in a different bubble. You know, they control the information to their people. Their people are usually committed to an idea that's very alien to much of the rest of the world. So you're kind of stuck. You know, the military option is also messy as heck. What do you do with people who are very diverse, maybe even only hooking up on the internet? So I will say one good thing is I can't think of any state actor absent the proliferation of nuclear weapons that would represent a threat to the continued existence of the United States. And then I threw in that caveat, and that one makes me very nervous. And it's the topic of books and articles forever, but it's a real one. You know, real bad non-state actors getting a nuclear weapon is a nightmare. And I would argue for any state, not just us, China, Russia, they all should be very nervous about that possibility.
And just to elaborate a little more, I was in the Pentagon on 9/11. Maybe some of you were also, and we've studied the lessons of 9/11, but they're focused on what we didn't know. They should be focused on what we would have done if we knew. Took a look at the deterring and, if necessary, preempting of non-state actors.
Yeah, just to add, I think the challenge in cyber, unlike other non-state actors that needed some physical sanctuary that, you know, existed somewhere in some bona fide sovereign state, and therefore, if they're allowing that, therefore now you're the problem. In the cyber world, there may be a way to create sanctuary, and then to determine that and then block it. You know, this is a higher level math for me, but I think that's a significant challenge. Where do these non-state actors live? Well, they live in the cyber world. Okay.
They live in their basement.
All right, and well, so the basement is in the country.
Their mom's
so
basement.
The country. And so yeah, so that is a challenge. I think I had one more thought, and your basement comment just evaporated. I do want to say how great it is to see you, ladies and gentlemen. This is a General retired Brzezinski, been a past panel member. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming. Okay.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Steve, and then, sir.
Sorry, two questions. So this is kind of going back to the bombs. And so, you know, this time of year, you always see articles like, it wasn't necessary to drop the bombs. And you see the rationale, and they're pretty convincing. So some of the things that I read this morning that came across were, you know, the U.S. knew that Russia had declared war on Japan, and they were going to invade, so why not let them do the job? Secondly, we could have just blockaded, you know, done a blockade And third is, so I want your responses to that. And the second question is, you know, you hear and read that current nuclear weapons are much, much more powerful than those that were dropped in August of '45. Can you tell us how much more, if you know? And Sir Fig, this might be directed towards you, but give us an idea of what we need to fear.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, why don't you do some of the first part?
Jim will talk to the first part. I'll just say that counterfactual supposition is a fool's errand. That should we or shouldn't we? We did. Okay? And we're not back there. We can't put ourselves back in Truman's office in the context of the time, and Jim can go more. How much more destructive? A significant nuclear exchange could very well render the northern hemisphere of the entire planet inhabitable. People wouldn't live and thrive there. So, I mean, it's that bad, and you don't have to say it has to be between these two countries at this level, based on the potential effects on climate and radiation and the environment and everything else. If you want to write off half the globe, that's a way to do it.
Quickly, Russia said it would join the war when it became clear that the United States would defeat Japan. If the United States told Russia that, no, we're not going to go ahead with war plans, you guys go ahead and we'll join you later on, the Russians wouldn't have done anything, would not have done anything. Question of a blockade. So, what is the idea? We're going to starve 75 million Japanese to death? Because that's what you're talking about there. Because we get back to the original point, which is the Japanese Committee of Six, the people, not the emperor, who were really running the country, believed that the country had to fight to the last man, woman, and child. So, you know, this is a weird way of putting it, but gosh, that's almost unthinkably horrible, that we would just sit by, not finish up what we had started to do, and just let the Japanese islands gradually starve to death with millions and millions of people dying because the leaders would insist that they die. So let's see, what was the last one? No, that's it. Basically, Russia wouldn't have done it for us. We would have had to do it. There would have had to be an invasion, or else a process that would have dragged on for years. While, as we said earlier, we're fighting in Luzon, you have these little pockets of Japanese resistance, including lots and lots of soldiers still fighting in China. So no, that would not have brought an end to the war. The atomic bombs did bring an end to the war.
Yeah, if we want to speculate on things that didn't happen, I'd rather do this one. What if the weapons had become available in January or February of 1945? How much less overall death and suffering would there have been on Okinawa and on mainland Japan? We'll never know, but it would have been less. I would offer you that it would have almost certainly been less, because we wouldn't have had to resort to the fire bombing of Tokyo and the other, and had to invade Okinawa. Still been horrible, maybe not as horrible.
Yeah, two things real quick. First, a blockade would really be nonsense. Blockading, isolating the ports of Japan from what? There's nobody's clamoring to get into Yokohama, and the effect would be this: if we just let them rot, I think the American people would just be repulsed by that. Not to mention that there was plenty of Japanese Americans that weren't in internment camps that still had connections there. The other thing I'd say, put my nuke physicist hat back on, just for Gordon here. So there are two reactions that God has designed into the nucleus or the atomic forces. One is fission, which is you split the atom, you create a whole bunch of nasty radiation and a lot of heat and light and destruction. The other is fusion, where you create out of two very, very tiny atoms another atom, which is inert. And I give you the sun, uses fusion. The problem with fusion is it's tremendously difficult. The amount of pressure to make that happen is super, super difficult. These are the thermonuclear weapons of today. They're fusion weapons. And so think of little, explosions of the heat of the sun that go off on the planet. And to the general's point, yeah, the entire northern hemisphere would be a crispy critter. You may not have any radiation, but you would have no life because of the tremendous heat that a fusion reaction creates. Incidentally, for no additional charge, fusion reactors are what we're really trying to get after in power because they don't have the waste that you do from a fission reaction. The problem is, again, how do you control the heat? It's literally tens of thousands of degrees hot. How do you contain that? It's almost impossible. So that's it. Thanks.
I want to consult with my co-moderator.
I was going to say, as we wrap up today's session, this is the 6th session of Journeys to Peace. I just wanted to share with the audience that the purpose of this initiative was information and knowledge of the 20th century history, identification of key events that have led to the Second World War, the warning signs that reemerge in similar patterns through history that may be emerging today, and the knowledge of the human propensity for war, as General Figg was sharing, and how it might be deterred. For the last 6 sessions, you've shared about what has happened. As we wrap up this series, can you give us some hope and share with us not just so what, but now what? Where do we all go from here? And thank you for the...
No, I just wanted to, when you've done that, then that will be the lead up, the hope. I'm going to bring up a young man who will give us hope, because we need, wait just a minute, Michelle Day, because we want to hear about what you folks have done so significant to what we're talking about today. Okay?
I would just to start off say that we do have one more session that's going to be oriented on hope, justice, and the better state of peace that emerges. We talked about a little bit certainly between the U.S. and Japan. And so keep your eye on the calendar for that. It's going to be sometime probably in October. So that'll be our official last of this series on the Second World War. I think there's a lot of cause for hope, and I think a lot of it's sitting right in here, so I'll just end there.
And a couple of quick comments on that. I genuinely believe that deterrence among nation states is possible. And if you get it right, you can make the other side realize that, look, doing something now is not in my own interest. And then that ties into the point that John just raised. Look, I think just about almost everybody here is younger than I am. Almost everybody. But I look at people here, you could be out watching the Blue Angels. You could be out just going to the beach. You're trying to stay awake. And you've heard a lot from a lot of people who are a lot older and seen a lot more. And the question is, what do you do with this? Well, hopefully, you will realize that we are a functioning democracy. Ultimately, what the people want guides the country. This is what General Figg was referring to earlier. You all owe your country attention to its past, concern for its present, hope for its future. You should be reaching out, trying to understand what makes the world tick. You should be reaching out to your peers, like the Rotary does. One thing that delights me is the number of kids I know in Hawaii who've talked about going to Japan. Just think about that. From somebody from Massachusetts, this is incomprehensible. But You are in an island in the middle of the Pacific. You're a third of the way over to China, to Japan. You have lots of organizations here that work with the outside world. You've got good schools, good universities. Do something with the world. Don't just stay, the Ohana here is beautiful and will always provide a home for you to go home to, but look at the world. Look at where, it doesn't have to be diplomacy, talking with other countries. It doesn't have to be military, talking about bombing other countries. But it does involve understanding the outside world. Get into international business. But remember that what happens in the outside world is going to affect all of us here in Hawaii. And you can start helping to shape that just by getting more knowledgeable about the world, its history, and where it might be going. Thank you.
Well, I can't finish without mentioning that, I lectured at Oxford in May.
We will send a link.
The link, it's on YouTube.
The lawyers on Maui.
And the lawyers on Maui. But part of my remarks at Oxford were about self-image, and I talked about my own self-image. I thought of myself as a warrior for all of my pseudo-adult life, and I still feel that way, but somehow I transitioned to becoming a peacemaker. And that's how I see myself now. That's not relevant, I'm just me, right? But I think our national image that you all will shape by your words, actions, is critical for the world. This is not America First or a political statement. We just have a special role and have for more than a century, and with it the equally special responsibility. Our national image has to be first and foremost of peacemakers. We still have to deter, because that's part of peacemaking. And I'll go to my pet rock, North Korea. We are war preventers in North Korea. We're not peacemakers. We haven't even ended the war. We have to continue to be war preventers, provide deterrence, but the U.S. government ought to end that war, ought to find a way to work seriously in a principled way to end the war. Now, our current president, and I'm not going to introduce politics, sees himself as a peacemaker. I hope he's right. There's some evidence that maybe some areas it might be working. Our next president, the president after that, and the president after that should recognize that the U.S.'s most desired role should be peacemaking, all the hard work of peacemaking.
So Karen, before we go on to the conclusion, I wanted to just read a quote that I shared last time. Daisaku Ikeda, who is one of the presidents of Sogo Gakkai International, wrote a book called The New Human Revolution. And every year he presented an anti-nuclear weapon document to the United Nations. And I leave this as a punctuation mark from what our general just said. All people essentially desire peace. It's not flowery rhetoric or pretense that draws forth that inner spirit from people's lives, but only open, honest dialogue coming from genuine and sincere humanity. And I think that's what these sessions were about. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was very appropriate. I also want to point out we've got some young people in here and people who've been following this. Elsa Millander, the young woman who put the lei on us, has been attending our study sessions where we all get together to talk about these, and we just appreciate so much. And I didn't introduce you earlier, but thank you very much for attending. And now I want to turn this over to Gordon Messler, because he's working on his Eagle badge,
Project. This is a really interesting project that very unique, I think, for Boy Scouts. So, would you like to come forward?
Sure. I'm going to go over there.
Okay, that's great. It doesn't need to be 1,000 minutes long.
Yeah, unless it's required for a bit.
Pardon?
Come on up here.
Yes, the mics are over.
Come on.
Thank you. Got something I'm going to read?
Okay, good.
So, unfortunately, the suffering did not end with the surrender. And as Mr. Steve Dyer talked about earlier, survivors of the blast faced discrimination and the mental burden of the blast. Also, as time went on, the radiation effect of the blast became very clear. Among the victims was Sadako Sasaki, who was 2 years old when the atomic bomb was dropped. She survived the bombing and continued to live a normal life, going to school and winning relay races with her friends until she contracted leukemia at the age of 11. She was subsequently hospitalized, and as her condition worsened, she heard of the tradition of folding 1,000 cranes for the fulfillment of a wish, senbasuru. She began folding paper cranes out of everything that she could, and by the time she succumbed to leukemia at 12 years old, she folded well over 1,000 cranes of many sizes and materials. Her courage birthed the annual tradition of folding senbazuru in her memory, and wishing for global peace. Now, Rowan, Alex, could I have you come forward with 1,000 cranes? These were folded by scouts of Troop 97, as well as members of the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam community. And I'm going to be giving these on to Mr. Steve Dyer of the Pearl Harbor Rotary Club, for him to transfer those on to the Hiroshima Rotary Club, the Pearl Harbor Rotary Club's sister club. So Steve, if you could come forward.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is awesome. Yeah, this is great.
I think so too.
Okay, so proud of you guys. This is really terrific. Okay, with that, would anybody like to say it's a wrap?
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
I said
Thank you all for being here. Thank you all very much, Boy Scouts and everyone, and amazing panelists, and my co-moderator, and Jasmine over there. Thank you very much, Jasmine.
Thank you, Jasmine.
All right.